Okay, well, I think I know most of the people here, but for anyone who I don't know or who's new to these meetings, I'm Lawrence Kermayer. I direct the Division of Social and Transcultural Psychiatry here at McGill. And this is our Thursday afternoon speaker series. We have several different series that occur at this time slot: global mental health, culture, mind, and brain, culture and community mental health, and culture and clinic. And generally, these are invited talks. We have about 2 hours for the whole meeting. And so people usually present for about an hour, and then we have an hour discussion. We're recording the presentation today, as we usually do, with the possibility that afterward we would edit it and, with the permission of the presenter, make the talk available. And as you'll hear as we go along, it's particularly important and significant today to have a record of the presentation. So it's my great pleasure and privilege then to introduce Dr. Fahimeh Mianji, who's presenting some of her work today. Fahimeh is a clinical and research cultural psychologist, clinical psychologist and cultural psychologist, who did her Ph.D. in cultural psychiatry here at McGill with me and others, and who has a long-standing engagement in understanding the intersection of culture, social structural issues, and mental health, particularly women's health. So as you'll hear, the work that she's going to be describing, which stretched over many years and which began with issues that are not at all unrelated to some of the current paroxysms that Iran is going through, but that are also central to how we think about the global circulation of ideas and practices in psychiatry. So it's a very interesting sort of intersection for us between really very important sociopolitical, geopolitical issues and very practical issues in terms of how mental health services develop and are deployed in different parts of the world. So I'm very excited. It's been a privilege for me to be able to work with Fahimeh over these years. It's been really enlightening and inspiring. She's worked not only as a clinician working with vulnerable populations and refugees and other groups, but also very active as an advocate and an agent of change. And so, as I say, it's been an honor and very inspiring to know Fahimeh and to work with her. And I hope this is just another chapter in our long discussion and collaboration. So let me turn it over to you, Fahimeh, and please go ahead and you can share your screen. And for the rest of you, it's fine to keep your faces there. I know when I talk, it's nice to have some kind of faces to look at least out of the corner of my eye. But do make sure you're muted so we can focus on the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Kiermaier, for the introduction. It has definitely been a great pleasure for me to be a part of our division of social and transcultural psychiatry and learn a lot from you and everyone else there. Thank you for the opportunity to present, to go back to our work and present it here in this series at the time that I think it's important to have some reviews of sociopolitical aspects of Iran and also the impact on the mental health and in a global scale and in a local scale. This is a great opportunity for me, and I appreciate that. Thanks everybody for attending. I'm going to share my screen there. Okay, I'm gonna start here. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, please feel free to interrupt if you have any question, any comments, and I would be happy to stop and get engaged in the conversation. The title of the conversation is Women as Troublemakers, the Hard Sociopolitical Context of Soft Bipolar Disorder in Iran. So I'm going today to talk about some reviews of Iran's social and gender policies, Then I will talk a little bit about bipolar spectrum disorder, the presentation, diagnosis, and practice in Iran, and the sociopolitical and cultural factors influencing the diagnosis of bipolar spectrum disorder in Iran, as well as the illness experiences of individuals diagnosed with bipolar spectrum disorder, and some implications, including global mental health implications. Since the 1979 revolution, Iran has been an Islamic theocratic republic country. While the economic policies of this country have changed between technocrats, neoliberals, and right-wing populists, the social policy has been determined largely by the right-wing populists. Like many societies in Iran too, gender is a critical determinant for health and mental health status, and is rooted in social, cultural, political, and mental health system-related factors. The Iran's regime has had a major political influence over the social and economical situation of women's lives. Exercising religious ideology at the state level affect women's rights and freedom within that society. Women during and after the revolution have served as political symbols of the regime. How they dress and act has been interpreted as reflections of Iran's society. Therefore, establishing laws specifically concerning women can be seen as a way for the states to practice control and power. However, in terms of education, since the revolution, while the Iran's regime has had its own agenda in promoting the Islamization of the education and society, it has made education, including higher education, more accessible for women, who now accounts for more than 64% of university students. Although Iran's unstable economy and gender discrimination have limited women's participation in their job market, the high rate of education of women has in turn expanded their expectations in terms of public participation socially, economically, and politically. Education has facilitated the knowledge of diverse secular and religious worldviews on gender equality, and women have increasingly questioned the legal and social limitations that the regime has imposed on them. Education also has helped with questioning the patriarchal family values, and both within the marriage and the broader society. Also, Iranian societal values and lifestyles have been greatly affected by broad access to the internet and satellite technology, which has facilitated their exposure to Western values due to the vast urbanization, globalization, big diaspora population, and to the rapid changes in technology and social values, which is very important, that the rapid changes in technology and advancement in technology. Iran's young society has been transformed from one with traditional and family social values to a modern and individualist societies. So here I have a couple of pictures from the time that post-revolution, the time that's called Cultural Revolution, that Iran's regime had this agenda of Islamization of the society, and then changed even not just the curriculum and contents, but also like even the pictures in the books. And now we see here like the Farsi book, grade 1, before and after the revolution, women here, and the little girl here, with and without the scarves. In this slide, I'm showing some pictures from the protests of women from the time 1978, that the forced hijab and dress code was imposed by the regime, that they protested against it, and it didn't succeed. And in post-revolution, in the left side, you see in the 1980s, There was a very difficult time. The oppression was very severe there, and the dress codes and that the regime wanted to impose on women succeeded quite a bit. And then we see here on the right side that in the 21st century, and with the advancement of technology and social media, things changed, and women had more opportunity to protest against the forced hijab and against other oppressive social and cultural values. And they would post their pictures on this social media without the scarves. There were also other great movements in the 21st centuries, like the 1 million signature campaign to end discrimination against women, and this My Filthy Freedom campaign that they would post their scarfless pictures on the social media to protest, as well as the election in the 2009, that women were also in front line to protest against the results of the election at the time of Ahmadinejad, and also make different campaigns and putting lots of pressure on the regime for access to the public sports stadium, which they succeeded that one. But what's going on right now in Iran? Whether we are witnessing a feminist revolution or something similar to that. This September, just less than a month ago, on September 16th, on the left side, you see the picture of this young girl, Mahsa Amini, 22 years old, who was arrested by the so-called morality police, which is the hijab police, in Tehran when she was visiting with her family, visiting Tehran. She's a Kurdish girl from the Kurdistan part of Iran, and they were just traveling to Tehran. And she was arrested, and under custody, she was beaten, and she got brain dead and died by the brutal act of this morality police. And since that date, there has been ongoing protests, street protests and social media protests, not just in different cities in Iran, but also in different cities in the world by Iranian diaspora. And as you see, the pictures on the right side, they also belong to the past few weeks, that women go to the street, they take off the scarves and they set their scarves in the fire, and these pictures are all in Iran. And here we see the different campaigns since then that has been going on, that symbolically women cut their hairs in support of, in solidarity with what Iranian women and what happened to Mahsa Amini. And this has been going on in different, not just among Iranians, but now like different celebrities, artists, people across the world are joining this campaign and protesting against the violence against women in Iran. And with this slang that Jen Jian Azadi or Zendegi Azadi, which means woman life freedom. And on the right side, you're seeing this picture of the rally in October 1st, last Saturday in Toronto, which was more than 50,000 of people out there. And in the same day, October 1st, in over 200 cities in the world, there were rallies in support of, in solidarity with Iranian women and protests inside Iran. So, and this is also mobilized by people in diaspora and Iranians in diaspora. And here, these are two short videos I will show you. On the left side, we see the students, high school students, that the director of the Ministry of Education is visiting this school during this protest to give lecture, advise students about stopping this protest, and this is how students treat it. Okay, here, as you see, students take off their scarves, which is against the law, and then they kick out this director of the Ministry of Education from the school while shouting out Bishara, which means like kind of insulting him, saying you have no dignity, and just kicking him out. And here are other students in the street.
Is there supposed to be sound with this, Fahimeh? Because we don't.
Oh, yes, you can't hear it?
No.
Okay, okay, it's okay. Just I think. Okay, and here students in the school, they are setting their scarves in fire. So I'm sorry if the sound wasn't there. It was just shouting at him and kicking him out. So I don't know why it didn't work. Okay, and here in these two pictures, you see that these students at the school, they take off their scarves, and then as you see, they are pointing to Supreme Leader, the previous one and the current one. And this is a huge taboo breaking behavior, because in Iran, if you say anything, any small thing against the Supreme Leader, that will come with severe consequences. And these young, very, very young women are just basically saying that we don't care about you at all, and we don't want you. And here in the right picture, you see that in the middle, it's written Islamic Republic, and they say F word and some F word to supreme leaders, and they are showing that we don't follow your dress code and what you are seeing in the picture. These are all from the past 2-3 weeks, and it's ongoing. And I have to say that also many more young people have been arrested and dead, and shot and dead and tortured during the past few weeks. Okay, well, it's not surprising that a society dominated by so many fundamental contradictions, rapid growth in the youth population rate, social repression, gender discrimination, revolution of all values, and a tension between modernity and traditional culture, that is a society that in fact experiences a dramatic increase in psychosocial distress. But how this psychosocial distress translated to biomedical discourse, it's very important for us to explore. In the book Writing Prozac Diaries in Tehran, Behruzan pointed out that psychiatry in Iran created a political affective impasse and resource to psychiatrize social hopelessness, with the almost unintended outcome of making an otherwise silent psychopolitical discourse possible. In a slightly later historical period than when Alkide Behruzan did her work on inflation of depression in Iran, our study explored a shift from the hopeless mood and depression to a society that has irritable mood and soft bipolarity. It's a shift from the quote in Behruzan's work where psychiatrists suggest putting Prozac antidepressant in Tehran water. This is jokingly, for sure, to our work where psychiatrists suggest putting the Paco mood stabilizer in the city's water, which implies that there is a nationwide depression, or there's a nationwide irritability. Following a worldwide controversy over the recent concept of bipolarity and the potential medicalizations of mood in the in the early 21st century, psychiatry in Iran also witnessed a dramatic increase in the use of this diagnosis. The use and practice of bipolar spectrum diagnosis has been a topic for debate in Iran, and there is controversy around that. And we started doing this research on this topic in 2014 to explore that how the new diagnostic category of bipolar spectrum disorder is understood and applied among psychiatrists, what factors are influencing the emergence of a spread of knowledge and practice related to bipolar spectrum disorder, what the illness meanings and experiences reported by individuals diagnosed with bipolar spectrum disorder are, what causal attributions, explanations, and helpness prototypes are described by individuals with this diagnosis, and their coping strategies and help-seeking strategies in their sociopolitical, gendered, and cultural context, and what the impact of these diagnoses are on their everyday life. I'll pass a few slides here. If you have any questions about the frameworks and methodological aspects, I will go back to it. This was a qualitative study that we conducted in 2 phases. The first phase was included an archival research and semi-structured interviews with 25 key academic psychiatrists who are involved in training. And we aim to clarify the introduction and spread of the new concept of bipolar disorder in Iran. Also, we interviewed the same psychiatrists to explore their use of this diagnosis with the patients. And in the second phase, we used the mini interview, mental illness narrative interview with 37 patients who received the diagnosis, age 18 to 55. Received the bipolar spectrum diagnosis, excluding the bipolar type 1. Also, we had ongoing archival material to help our understanding of the academic context within which the contemporary psychiatric in Iran has been constantly constructed. The study was conducted in different cities in Iran, 4 different cities, and the reason, and 6 different academic institutions. And the reason was that we wanted to make sure that we have enough diversity of the narratives because in different cities in Iran, there are different resources and different access to the healthcare system and different practices. So in a city like Tehran or the more central cities like Shiraz and Isfahan, there are certain resources available, much more resources available, and in the cities in the across the border, like Zabul, in Zahedan, Zabul, and closer to the border of Iran, Afghanistan, where we did a part of this research, there are much less resources available. There were some methodological limitations for sure for our work. Patients were already seeing psychiatrists and they received this diagnosis, and they were selected by the clinicians and as our potential participants. And the position of the researcher who was me as an expat Iranian psychologist who is affiliated with the Western University was also a bit complicated, because for some people who they're very fed up with the system in Iran, I would be considered as an ally. For some people who were very attached to the system, the regime, I would be considered as a spy. I heard both terms there about myself. And also, this research was conducted at the time of political repression, oppression of social scientists and international researchers, which made the field work also very risky and very complicated. We are not we don't aim to generalize the results of the research. It's not for generalizability, but it's for understanding the situation, exploring the situation better. So the results of the first phase of the research was published in the paper titled "The Globalization of Biological Psychiatry and the Rise of Bipolar Spectrum Disorder in Iran." This paper is published in the Journal of Culture, Medicine, Psychiatry. The first phase of this study showed us the journey of the dynamics of the use of bipolar spectrum diagnosis and its consequences. In other words, how this Western concept of bipolarity traveled from the US to Iran, and how this diagnosis and treatment are understood and applied by Iranian psychiatrists. Conducting a semi-structured interview with key academic psychiatrists, I described the controversy and the uncritical adoption of bipolar spectrum diagnosis by many psychiatrists, and I also explored some of the global and local factors involved in the rise of bipolar spectrum diagnosis and the apparent overdiagnosis of bipolar spectrum and overprescription of mood stabilizers and antipsychotic medications, particularly to women. In this study, participants pointed out that, these are the psychiatrist accounts, pointed out that there is a significant increase in the bipolar spectrum diagnosis, and this diagnosis has been much more frequently applied to women, particularly to some behaviors that are seen as socially deviant or abnormal, in part because they challenge or transgress existing norms. The patients received the bipolar label for a range of symptoms that psychiatrists broadly call emotional instability, irritable mood, dysphoric mood, impulsivity or feminine disinhibition, hypersexual behaviors such as casual sex and extramarital affair, disruptive or oppositional behaviors, that is women's emancipation, atypical depressive features, responding to the treatment too quickly, and treatment-resistant depression. Here I have a quote from one of the academic psychiatrists who I interviewed. I'll let you just read it yourself. I think it's easier in that way. Basically, in other words, these psychiatrists who have very conservative values may not interpret their patients' behaviors based on the current norms of the society and can label such behaviors as disorder in the context of either their own or the patient's, their patient's family values, as you can see the way that they're putting together the symptoms here, and then they decide about the label and about the intervention. Here I have another psychiatrist account. A broad use of non-specific criteria for diagnosing bipolar spectrum disorder or bipolar disorder was not uncommon about our interviews. The most, we talked about the most common symptoms that they would go with this diagnosis, and these symptoms or these behaviors can be easily applied to a range from ordinary variations in temperament behaviors that can be culturally seen as taboo breaking, or like disruptive behaviors, and specific traits of personality to other diagnoses such as depression, cluster B personality disorder. So basically, particularly in this account, the psychiatrist was saying that it's not that we don't know that this patient, this person, this young girl might not have bipolar disorder, but what can we do with this situation? If there is a young girl who is having different cell phone numbers and having boyfriends and going out and doesn't obey the family and dishonors the family, the tension in the family is so high that we have to kind of do some sort of intervention, or because we don't have access to good psychosocial interventions, we go with some medication to just make her dull and stay at home and doesn't cause trouble for the family. But what is being medicalized here? The normal reactive emotions, women's rebelliousness, sexual behaviors, sociocultural conflicts, and changes in sociocultural norms are mostly being medicalized or psychiatrized under this umbrella of bipolarity. In addition to the current practices that reflects the influence of international and transnational psychiatry, particularly leading American psychiatrists, because Iran's psychiatric system is very much influenced by the American psychiatry and the leading figures in the US. To some degrees, local pharmaceutical companies and lack of community psychiatry models and social, political, and ideological and structural factors have played a significant role in the overuse of bipolar spectrum disorder in Iran and the marked gender difference. So this was a summary of the first phase of the study, our study, on why this diagnosis have been spread very fast, and factors involved in it, and the way that it's being used and being practiced. And then in the second phase of the study, which the paper is published in Culture, Medicine, Psychiatry 2, titled Women as Troublemakers, the hard sociopolitical context of soft bipolar disorder in Iran, we listened to the patients' accounts, narratives. I interviewed, as I said, 37 patients who received this diagnosis. And in addition to interviewing the patients, also I did an archival analysis of social media and the discourse around mental health, women's mental health, and the bipolar disorder in those years between 2015 to 2020. So we saw that according to psychiatrist accounts, most of the cases diagnosed bipolar are called atypical bipolar, soft bipolar, bipolar spectrum, or افسردگی نوسانی, which means pendular depression. These patients do not meet the DSM criteria, either by length of episode or by the severity. However, 30 to 50% of psychiatric cases receive this diagnosis, and most of them are women between age 15 to 35. And most common symptoms of this bipolar spectrum is irritability, dysphoria, emotionality, impulsivity, casual sexual behaviors, so having self-esteem. They even mentioned that having too much self-esteem, and challenging the norms, and having oppositional, what they called oppositional behaviors. However, the patient's narratives is different. First, the idioms they use for this diagnosis, except some patients who had a higher education, who would use the bipolar disorder as their idioms. Most of them would call it neurologic suffering, depression, pendular depression, soft bipolar disorder. With soft bipolar also comes from their psychiatrist to them. But the most common local idiom attached to the bipolarity from the patient's narratives is the shakhsiyati budan, which literally means having two personalities. Although we didn't find a gender difference in local expressions for bipolar spectrum disorder, there was a clear gender difference in the factors to which patients attributed the cause of their mental suffering to. Male patients mostly attributed the causes of their bipolarity to their professional, financial, and educational struggles that could lead to failing to meet societal expectations of being a competent provider for their families. However, for female participants, patients, they attributed the causes of their mental sufferings mostly to sociocultural, structural, and family problems that reproduce each other. Only a few participants added genetic factors and mismanagement by mental health professionals to this list. And the structural problems include sociopolitical oppression, patriarchal and gender discriminatory law, patriarchal societal values, lack of social and legal support for women, lack of equal job opportunities, women's economic dependency, poor work conditions, and poverty. Here we have a couple of, I have a long quote from one of the patients that I think is very telling, and it's important to just read it, and then we can discuss this too. I can read it. In Iran, everything is bipolar. We are one kind of person outside the home and another kind inside the home. In the school, we have 4 hours of religious classes per week and have to spend our time on learning and adopting things that neither are important to us nor that we believe in. In school, you must behave one way and in home another way. For example, in school, you must go to the prayer room, and even if you don't want to pray, you have to stay next to those who are praying and pretend to pray. At home, you see that your family members are drinking wine, while in school, you learn that drinking alcohol is a sin and illegal. You have to wear hijab in public while you can dress freely in non-public space. You have to pretend to believe or to do many things while outside, and those codes are so strongly dictated to you that they occupy a part of your brain. On the other hand, you live a different world while inside the home. I think these contradictions contributed to my mental health. They affect us particularly during the childhood. Now that I am older, for example, I put a scarf over my head outside and realize that why things are in this way. But when you are younger, these contradictions do not make sense to you. When you are younger, you are like a dough that is getting shaped, and here everyone shapes you in their own form. Society, including school and public, shapes you in one form, and the family, indoor people, shapes you in the opposite form. You get frayed between these polarities and can shape your own personality. Then you become bipolar or two personality if you cannot adjust to this. So in addition to the contradictions between the values of parents and those of children due to what we talked about, like the generation gap and the gap in the rapid changes in cultural values, we also, in Iran, we also had this dramatic contrast and contradictions between private and public values in many secular and non-religious Iranian families in the past few decades. Because after the Iran's revolution, not every family employed the religious values and codes that the Islamic regime dictated to them in their private, in the public spaces. They don't follow that in their private spaces necessarily. While some families left the country because of these restrictive sociopolitical codes, many non-religious and secular families resisted adopting religious values and codes in their private spaces, as you can see in those movies and the films and the pictures I show. You see very young women taking off their scarves in the streets or protesting, and also you can, if you follow the news, you can see many of their parents supporting them in these protests. So given the need to respect the public norms, many people must carry contradictory personas during their everyday life. This is particularly common among the younger generations who have grown up after the revolution in the era of irreconcilable tensions between indoor-outdoor values. These contradictions was brought up by some of our participants as one of the causes of their distress or being having the bipolar disorder, or being having two personalities or being two personalities. It is worth noting that the contradictory indoor-outdoor codes and values impact on both young men and women in Iran. However, many facets of the religious ideological norms, which are dictated by both the states and patriarchal families, such as mandatory hijab, Islamic family law with unequal marriage and divorce rights, and the emphasis on women's sexual modesty and purity, etc., only affect women's rights and freedoms, and therefore systematically disadvantage them within both society and their families. So the use of this bipolar spectrum disorder diagnosis and biomedical interventions as a pragmatic tool to intervene in women's mental suffering is influenced by the increasing, the increase in the diagnosis also is influenced by the increasing prevalence of psychological problems such as anxiety and depressive disorders that are rooted in women's struggles with the oppressive sociopolitical, patriarchal, and economic situations that they live in. Also by bringing a significant number of patients from other diagnoses such as anxiety, depression, borderline personality disorders under the umbrella of the bipolar spectrum disorder, because of the lack in the psychosocial services and community mental health services, and by also making bipolar a gendered or feminine diagnosis through a series of symptoms such as women's emancipation, harsh makeup, extending social relationships through social medias, extramarital effort, etc., that we talked about. But this is quite harmful and particularly harmful for women, because this can lead to the wider use of mood stabilizers and neuroleptics for symptoms symptoms that might not have things to do with mood stabilizers or neuroleptics, and by also removing the opportunity to examine and attest to the sociocultural and political conditions that surround women, which reflects a patriarchal system of gender that interacts with social, political, institutional, economic orders, and by ruling out as impractical any consideration of changes in the social structure and values that could promote healthier, equal, and more sustainable environments. So as we see here, the biomedical approach here as a pragmatic approach, very much promoted by the Western psychiatry in terms of, particularly for the bipolar spectrum, bipolar disorder, can harm people in different parts of the world severely in different ways. In this study, we also, in the second phase, we explored the coping and help-seeking strategies of the patients and the barriers to receive interventions. And in terms of the coping and health-seeking strategies, although the cultural attributions of the patients for experiencing this mental problem was mostly social and political and familiar problems, but the coping and help-seeking strategies on the top was psychiatric services, using psychiatric services, and in a few cases, psychological services and social supports and alternative sources of care. Also, the perceived barriers to receive the mental health services are indicated as structural, biological, and stigma-related barriers. And what influenced their health-seeking strategies also included the structural limitations, biological psychiatry, the official psychology and counseling services permitted by Iran's government, which is very conservative and very much controlled by the state's ideology. Therefore, the biological psychiatry services there is way more available and accessible and affordable, because medication can be covered by insurance. But the psychological services are first not insured, it's not available, it's not affordable like biological interventions, and also for the services that are available, there is this, according to our participants, there is the lack of cultural informed services, in a sense that they have to follow, apparently, like some counselors or some psychologists, they have to follow certain paths that is dictated in their license by the states, and not adapt their work to the needs and to the culture of the patients. Also, another influence is the popular psychology and consultation that offer remotely from the diaspora. I have to clarify this, that the diasporan population of Iranians is quite big. It's about like 10%, over 10% of near 15% of the country are living outside of the country. Most of them immigrated during the past 2 decades. And globalization and the advancement in technology and internet has made it very easy to have this flow of information from the outside of the country and inside the country, and the exchange of information. So there are these TV channels and news channels and media channels organized by the managed by the people in diaspora that are vastly used inside Iran. There are more people who use the satellites and the TV outside, the TV channels that are managed outside of Iran than the national TV in Iran. Yeah, and here, sorry, no. I brought all of this, the results of these different findings, different phases of research in this in our study in this diagram, and trying to offer an ecological explanation, ecosocial explanation for the spread and the use of bipolar spectrum diagnosis. So taken together from the different phase, the findings of different phases of these studies, this study suggests that in order to understand the recent widespread use and impacts of the bipolar spectrum disorder in Iran, it is essential to adopt an ecosocial and cultural approach that takes into account the intersection and interactions between macro, meso, and micro factors, that is global trends in mental health, the historical, structural, cultural, and sociopolitical realities of the local context, and the sociocultural realities of individual predicaments. If you want, we can come back also to this diagram and discuss it more. I would like to give more time to the discussion. So I briefly talk about the implications, and then hopefully we can have the Q&A. Our research, in terms of the clinical implications of our research, we suggest that privileging biological causality and as a result by medical treatment, risk ignoring the psychological, sociological, cultural, structural, and political problems that contribute to and maintain the suffering of patients with bipolar spectrum disorder. We suggest that the general models of psychiatric frameworks must be replaced with a specific formulation and intervention plan for an individual that is tailored to the patient's psychosocial problems and needs, and prioritizes the patient's voice and values over the ideological view of the clinicians and the structural defects of the psychiatric system. This model emphasizes the importance of not only cultural sensitivity, but also structural competency in clinical education and practice. Furthermore, alternative psychotherapeutic approaches that directly address discrimination, oppression, and other systemic barriers can help clinicians to respond to the social, structural, and political and cultural factors that shape patients' experience of suffering and therefore treatment. From a global mental health research and policy standpoint, there is a need for an epistemological approach that provides a set of conceptual tools and methods that global mental health researchers and policymakers can use to understand the intersection of multiple global and local factors in shaping patients' experience of mental suffering and their coping and help-seeking strategies. Furthermore, conducting research with an ecosocial approach in non-Western countries with complex political systems, particularly those with oppressive regimes, raises ethical and safety concerns that are not properly addressed by global mental health scientists and policymakers. Global mental health must design clear strategies for the researchers to access and understand people's narratives despite systemically and culturally imposed self-silencing or self-censoring. and to develop specific skill sets, tools, and networks that help them to understand the macro and micro level factors and how they interact and co-interact in such complex societies. And finally, to protect themselves, their informants, their local collaborators, and the knowledge they produce from being controlled, manipulated, censored, falsified, and oppressed by the government. And in terms of the conceptual and research implications, we need more studies across different socio-cultural and political contexts to reveal how the use of Western psychiatric diagnosis may allow clinicians to ignore underlying social, structural, and gendered causes of mental sufferings, leading to the silencing of many voices, particularly those of more vulnerable groups, and how psychiatric practice can marginalize the discourse surrounding structural, political, and social problems. We also need more qualitative studies examining clinical and professional discourse to reveal how the culture of the mental health system itself limits clinician sensitivity to cultural and structural factors that shape the patient's experience with mental suffering, health seeking, and healing. Community-based participatory research that includes the voice of participants and ensure that the control over the research process can contribute to shifting power to the community, raising people's awareness and expectations of mental health care systems, and providing them with the language and tools to resist oppressive interventions. And finally, including advocacy in research and clinical practice is an essential step in bringing change to the policies that contribute to the structural defects in mental health systems and in wider societies. Thank you for your time, and I hope that everyone can stand with in solidarity with the women of Iran these days, and do raise awareness or anything you can do in terms of advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fahimeh. It's really excellent and important. It was important before the recent moment and seems all the more pertinent right now.